Welcome to WW2 Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. In the humming, claustrophobic confines of a German U-boat, deep beneath the gray waves of the North Atlantic, a radio operator hunches over a machine that looks like a fortified typewriter. With a crisp, mechanical clatter, he types a message. Each press of a key causes a different letter on the lampboard above to illuminate, transforming vital intelligence into a seemingly random scramble of characters. This is the Enigma, the cryptographic heart of the German war machine. To the Third Reich, it is more than a tool. It is a guarantee of secrecy, a shield of invincibility. With an astronomical number of possible settings, over 150 million, the Enigma was considered by its creators and users alike to be utterly unbreakable. The logic was sound. The machine's core consisted of a series of rotating wheels, or rotors, each with 26 electrical contacts. As a key was pressed, electricity flowed through a maze of wiring in the rotors, was reflected, and returned through a different path to light up the encrypted letter. With each keystroke, at least one rotor would turn, completely changing the electrical pathway for the next letter. This polyalphabetic substitution cipher was complex enough, but the addition of a plugboard at the front, which swapped pairs of letters before and after the rotor scrambling, magnified the complexity to a level that defied manual calculation. For an enemy to decipher a message, they would need to know the exact rotors used, their order, their starting positions, and the plugboard connections for that day. Without this key, a single, short message was just statistical noise. German High Command issued new keys daily, confident that even if a machine were captured, it would be useless by the next morning. This confidence permeated the entire German military, from the generals of the Afrika Korps to the pilots of the Luftwaffe, allowing them to communicate openly, believing their every command, every strategy, was wrapped in an impenetrable shroud of secrecy. They were tragically, catastrophically wrong. Long before the Blitz scarred the skies of London, and before British minds gathered at Bletchley Park, the first intellectual assault on Enigma was already underway in a quiet Warsaw office. The year was 1932. While the world was distracted by economic depression and the uneasy peace of the interwar years, Poland, wedged precariously between an aggressive Germany and a hostile Soviet Union, knew that survival depended on intelligence. They had to know their enemy's intentions before they acted. The Polish Cipher Bureau, the Biuro Szyfrów, recruited three brilliant young mathematicians, Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rosiecki, and Henryk Zygalski. These were not seasoned spies, but academic prodigies plucked from Poznan University. They were tasked with the impossible, to break Enigma. Rejewski, the lead, did not attack the machine with linguistic analysis, the traditional method of code breaking. Instead, he waged a war of pure mathematics. He applied permutation theory to find patterns not in the messages themselves, but in the underlying structure of the cipher. The Germans, in a fatal procedural error, required operators to type the three-letter message key twice at the start of each transmission to ensure it was received correctly. This repetition, this faint echo in the cryptographic chaos, was the crack Rejewski needed. It created a mathematical relationship between the first and fourth, second and fifth, and third and sixth letters of the encrypted preamble. By exploiting this flaw, Rejewski and his team developed techniques and machines to reverse engineer the Enigma's internal wiring. They built the Bombe cryptologicsna, or cryptologic bomb, a forerunner to the British bomb, an electromechanical device that clattered through rotor settings to find the daily key. They also created the Zygalski sheets, large perforated paper grids used to identify the final components of the key. For years, Poland was reading German communications, a silent, secret advantage. But as war clouds gathered in the summer of 1939, they knew they could not hold this secret alone. In a clandestine meeting in the Pyry Forest near Warsaw, with the scent of pine and impending doom in the air, the Poles handed over everything to their British and French allies. Replica Enigma machines, blueprints for the Bombe, and the priceless knowledge of its vulnerabilities. It was a gift that would change the world, delivered just weeks before Poland was erased from the map. In 1938, with the Munich Agreement failing to quell the rising tide of German aggression, the head of Britain's secret intelligence service, Admiral Sir Hugh Sinclair, made a discreet purchase. Using his own money, he acquired a sprawling Victorian estate in Buckinghamshire for £6,000. Its name was Bletchley Park. To the outside world, it was just another country house, perhaps a convalescent home for the well-to-do. Its public-facing cover story was that it was a shooting party, Captain Ridley's shooting party, to be precise. But behind the gates of Station X, as it was codenamed, the real war had already begun. Sinclair knew that if conflict came, London would be a primary target. He needed a secure, remote location for the government code and cipher school, GC and CS, a place where the nation's sharpest minds could wage a silent war of intellect, far from the bombs and bureaucracy of the capital. Bletchley Park was perfect. It had a direct rail link to both London and, crucially, the universities of Oxford and Cambridge, which would become its primary recruiting grounds. As the first wave of personnel arrived, a mere 150 academics, linguists, and civil servants, the atmosphere was a strange mix of country quiet and feverish urgency. They were led by figures like Dilly Knox, a brilliant, eccentric classicist who had broken codes in the First World War. Knox and his small team took the phenomenal Polish breakthrough and began the painstaking work of adapting it. The Germans were constantly improving Enigma's security, adding more rotors and increasing the operational complexity. The early days at Bletchley were a frantic scramble to keep up, to build on the foundation they had been given before the window of opportunity slammed shut. Wooden huts began to spring up across the lawns, each designated for a specific, highly compartmentalized task. Secrecy was absolute. Staff were forbidden from discussing their work with anyone, even their colleagues in the next hut over. They signed the Official Secrets Act, a vow of silence they would carry, in many cases, to their graves. The fate of the free world was beginning to rest on this unassuming patch of English countryside. As the war exploded across Europe, Bletchley Park underwent a transformation of staggering scale and speed. The initial core of 150 personnel swelled into a vast, secret city of code-breaking, eventually housing nearly 10,000 people by 1945. This was no ordinary military recruitment drive. The call went out not for soldiers, but for minds. The GC and CS sought out individuals with unusual talents. University dons, chess grandmasters, Egyptologists, linguists fluent in multiple languages, and famously champions of the Daily Telegraph's cryptic crossword puzzle. The logic was simple. They needed people who could see patterns where others saw only chaos. The most significant demographic shift, however, was in gender. In an era when women were largely confined to domestic or junior roles, Bletchley Park became a revolutionary exception. By the war's end, an astonishing 75% of the workforce, some 75,000 people, were women. They were recruited from the Women's Royal Naval Service, WRENS, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAFs, and civilian life. Initially brought in for clerical and administrative duties, their capabilities quickly saw them promoted to roles of immense technical and analytical importance. They operated the complex code-breaking machinery, managed the vast libraries of indexed German messages, and performed the delicate analysis that pieced together fragments of intelligence into a coherent picture. Life at Bletchley was a study in contrasts. Outside the huts, staff lived in nearby towns and villages, dealing with rationing and the daily anxieties of wartime Britain. Inside, they were privy to the enemy's most sensitive secrets, yet bound by a vow of silence so strict it strained relationships with family and friends. The estate was organized into a series of specialized huts, creating an intellectual assembly line. Hut 3 was responsible for translating and analyzing Army and Air Force decrypts, while Hut 4 handled naval intelligence. Hut 6 was the factory for breaking German Army and Air Force Enigma keys, and Hut 8, led by Alan Turing, focused exclusively on the formidable naval Enigma. This compartmentalization was vital for security, but created an environment where few understood the full scope of the operation. They were all cogs in a vast, secret machine, each performing their critical function in the greatest intellectual feat of the war. Among the eclectic geniuses at Bletchley Park, one name stands above all others: Alan Turing. A shy, eccentric, and visionary mathematician from Cambridge, Turing possessed a mind that saw the world in pure, unassailable logic. He was not just a code breaker. He was a theoretical architect who could conceive of machines that could think. When he arrived at Bletchley, he immediately recognized both the brilliance of the Polish work and its limitations against Germany's ever-evolving Enigma protocols. The Germans had increased the number of rotors, making the Polish Bombe obsolete. A new, more powerful approach was needed. Turing's genius was to industrialize the process of deduction. He theorized a machine that wouldn't simply test keys randomly, but would hunt for logical contradictions. The key was the crib, a piece of text that was guessed or known to be in the message, such as a standard weather report or a formulaic sign-off like Heil Hitler. If you could guess a fragment of the plaintext, you could work out the relationship between those letters and their encrypted counterparts. Turing's machine, which he designed with fellow mathematician Gordon Welchman, would test thousands of possible rotor settings against this crib. Welchman's contribution of a diagonal board dramatically increased its efficiency. The machine, named the Bombe, was not a computer in the modern sense. It did not decrypt messages. Instead, it was a complex electromechanical device designed to find the correct rotor order and settings for the day. Standing 6.5 feet tall and 7 feet wide, the Bombe was a behemoth of whirring drums and clicking relays, its front a tangle of wires that mimicked the Enigma's plug board. When a potential solution was tested, dozens of rotors, corresponding to multiple Enigma machines, would spin at high speed. If the machine detected a logical contradiction, a setup that was impossible based on the crib, it would discard that setting and move on. When it found a setting that was logically consistent, it would stop. This stop provided a small handful of possible keys that a codebreaker could then test manually. The sound in Hut 11, where the bombs were housed, was a deafening, ceaseless industrial roar, 24 hours a day. These machines, operated primarily by wrens, were the engine room of Bletchley Park, turning Turing's abstract mathematical theory into a war-winning weapon. The heart of the Bletchley Park operation beat within two unassuming wooden buildings, Hut 6 and Hut 8. Here, the daily battle against Enigma was fought and won. The workflow was a high-pressure race against time, dictated by the German military's rigid schedule. Every 24 hours at midnight, every Enigma network across the Third Reich would change its settings. The slate was wiped clean. The work of the previous day became obsolete, and the code breakers were faced with a fresh, impenetrable wall of gibberish. The process began at listening stations across Britain, where operators, many of them women, would painstakingly transcribe the endless streams of Morse code chatter. These encrypted messages were then rushed to Bletchley Park by motorcycle courier. In Hut 6, under the leadership of Gordon Welchman and John Jeffries, the focus was on the Luftwaffe and German Army codes. Their first task was to find a crib, the vital snippet of guessed plaintext. They became masters of German military procedure, identifying stereotyped phrases, routine weather reports, or even the laziness of individual operators who might use predictable keys like their girlfriend's initials. Once a crib was established, the proposed settings were sent to Hut 11 to be run on the bombs. The wrens would configure the machines, the drums would spin, and hours later, a potential key might be found. This key would be passed back to the cryptanalysts in Hut 6. In a moment of intense pressure, a tester would set up a types machine, a British equivalent of the Enigma, with the proposed settings and type in a captured cipher text. If the result was garbled nonsense, it was a false stop. But if it produced coherent German, the cry would go up, typing. A wave of relief and triumph would sweep the hut. The key was broken for that day. A similar drama unfolded in Hut 8, led by the brilliant Alan Turing, which faced the far greater challenge of the Kriegsmarine, or German Navy, Enigma. The naval Enigma was more secure. using more rotors and far stricter procedures. For long, agonizing periods, particularly during the blackout of 1942, naval Enigma remained dark, costing thousands of lives and millions of tons of shipping in the Atlantic. Breaking it required not only the bombs, but also astonishing feats of intellectual deduction, piecing together clues from every available source to give the machines a fighting chance. The pressure in these huts was immense, a relentless cycle of frustration and elation, with the fate of armies and navies hanging on their success. Nowhere was the impact of Bletchley Park's success more decisive than in the cold, unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic. In the early years of the war, Britain was fighting for its life, a lone island nation dependent on vital convoys of food, fuel, and war materials from North America. And stalking these lifelines were Admiral Dönitz' U-boats, the silent hunters of the Kriegsmarine. Operating in coordinated groups known as wolf packs, they inflicted devastating losses, sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced. Britain was slowly being strangled. The Admiralty's tracking room, the Operational Intelligence Center, was the nerve center of this desperate battle, but for long stretches they were fighting blind. The breaking of the naval Enigma by Turing's Hut 8 changed everything. The intelligence derived from these decrypts was codenamed Ultra. It was the most closely guarded secret of the war, its distribution limited to a handful of top commanders, including Winston Churchill himself. Suddenly, the fog of war began to lift. Ultra intercepts revealed the daily positions of U-boats, their operational orders from Dönitz, their patrol routes, and their rendezvous points for refueling. For the first time, the Admiralty could see the enemy's moves in near real time. This intelligence had a twofold effect. First, it was used defensively. Convoys could be rerouted, sometimes by hundreds of miles, to steer clear of known wolf pack concentrations. The U-boats would surface in an empty ocean, their prey having vanished as if by magic. Second, it allowed the Allies to go on the offensive. Royal Navy hunter-killer groups, equipped with new radar and anti-submarine weapons, could be vectored directly towards the U-boats. The hunters became the hunted. The turning point came in the spring of 1943. With Ultra flowing consistently, Allied forces decimated the U-boat fleet. In May alone, 41 U-boats were sunk, a catastrophic and unsustainable loss for the Kriegsmarine. Admiral Dönitz was forced to withdraw his forces from the North Atlantic, acknowledging a stunning defeat. He wrote in his war diary, "We had lost the Battle of the Atlantic." He never knew why. The flow of supplies to Britain was secured, making the eventual invasion of Europe possible. The victory was silent, achieved not with guns and depth charges alone, but with the clatter of a bomb machine in a Buckinghamshire hut. The strategic power of Ultra extended far beyond the naval war. On the sun-baked sands of North Africa, it became the decisive weapon in the duel between two legendary commanders, Britain's General Montgomery and Germany's Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel. Rommel's Afrika Korps was a formidable fighting force, renowned for its tactical brilliance and lightning maneuvers. Yet Rommel had a critical vulnerability. a long and tenuous supply line stretching across the Mediterranean. Every drop of fuel, every bullet, every tank had to make the perilous sea journey from Italy. Ultra-intelligence provided the Royal Navy and the RAF with a precise, daily manifest of Rommel's supply chain. Bletchley Park's decrypts detailed which ships were sailing, what cargo they carried, and what route they were taking. Allied submarines and aircraft, armed with this perfect information, systematically targeted and destroyed the Axis convoys. Rommel's panzers, the iron fist of his army, were slowly starved of fuel. His diaries are filled with frustration and confusion, lamenting the uncanny ability of the British to find and sink his vital supply ships. He suspected a spy in his headquarters, but never imagined his own encrypted communications were betraying him. By the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942, the material advantage had shifted decisively. Montgomery knew from Ultra the exact state of Rommel's dwindling fuel and ammunition reserves, allowing him to plan his offensive with confidence. The Africa Corps, unable to maneuver effectively, was crushed. This victory was a massive turning point. Churchill called it the end of the beginning. Perhaps Ultra's most critical contribution, however, came in the build-up to the greatest amphibious invasion in history. D-Day, June 6, 1944. The entire success of the Normandy landings depended on achieving strategic surprise. The Allies had concocted a massive deception plan, Operation Fortitude, to convince the Germans that the main invasion would come at the Pas-de-Calais. Ultra was the tool used to measure the deception's success. By reading German High Command's messages, Allied planners could confirm that Hitler and his generals had swallowed the bait. They saw orders keeping the powerful 15th Army, with its crucial panzer divisions, fixed in the Calais region, waiting for a phantom invasion, even as Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. General Dwight D. Eisenhower would later call Ultra a decisive factor in the Allied victory, a sentiment echoed by commanders across every theater of the war. For decades after the war, the story of Bletchley Park was dominated by the towering figures of its male geniuses, Turing, Welchman, Knox. But this narrative overlooks a fundamental truth. The code-breaking factory could not have functioned without its vast and largely female workforce. Of the nearly 10,000 people working at Station X at its peak, 3 out of every 4 were women. They were the engine, the lifeblood, and the silent guardians of Ultra's secrets. Recruited into the women's auxiliary services, the WRENs, WAAFs, and ATS, or as civilian employees, they performed every conceivable role in the intelligence pipeline. Many were listeners at remote Y stations, enduring long, tedious hours with headphones pressed to their ears, meticulously transcribing the faint Morse signals that were the raw material of Bletchley's work. At the park itself, they managed the colossal task of indexing and cross-referencing every decrypted message, creating a searchable library of German military intelligence. And in Hut 11, the Bombe room, it was the WRENs who performed the physically and mentally demanding job of operating Turing's machines. In a deafening, oil-scented environment, they would spend 8-hour shifts on their feet, plugging in hundreds of cables to configure the bombs for each new run, checking the spinning drums, and logging the stops that might yield a daily key. Their work was not merely mechanical. Many women were brilliant analysts and cryptographers in their own right. Joan Clark, a Cambridge-educated mathematician, worked alongside Alan Turing in Hut 8 and became one of its leading figures. Her contributions so vital she was given a pay rise and promoted to a position officially designated for a man. The human cost of this secret war was immense. Bound by the Official Secrets Act, these women could not share the true nature of their vital, world-changing work with their parents, husbands, or children. They carried the burden of knowledge, of battles won and lost, of convoys sunk, of cities bombed, in total silence. When the war ended, they were unceremoniously dismissed, told to forget everything they had seen and done. For more than 30 years, their role in shortening the war and saving countless lives went completely unrecognized. They were the forgotten army, the unsung heroines of the intellectual war, whose silence was as crucial to victory as the noise of the machines they operated. The legacy of Bletchley Park extends far beyond the end of the Second World War. While the breaking of Enigma was its most famous achievement, the intellectual pressure cooker of Station X also gave birth to a machine that would truly change the world. As the war progressed, the codebreakers encountered a new, far more formidable challenge: the Lorentz cipher. Used by German high command for top-level communications between Hitler and his generals, the tunny, as the British called it, was a teleprinter cipher far more complex than Enigma. It was a 12-wheeled beast whose cryptographic security was orders of magnitude greater. The mathematical challenge fell to Bill Tutt, who, in another feat of staggering genius, deduced the entire logical structure of the Lorentz machine without ever having seen one. But knowing how it worked was not the same as being able to break its messages in a timely manner. The calculations were too vast and complex for human or even bomb-scale electromechanical methods. A new kind of machine was needed. The answer came from a post-office research engineer named Tommy Flowers. He proposed a radical solution: a machine that would use thousands of vacuum tubes to perform logical operations at immense speed. His superiors were skeptical, believing a machine of such complexity would be too unreliable. Undeterred, Flowers built it anyway, largely with his own money. The result was Colossus. Unveiled in 1944, Colossus was the world's first programmable, digital, electronic computer. It filled a room, contained over 1,500 vacuum tubes, and could read a paper tape of encrypted text at a phenomenal 5,000 characters per second. It processed the ciphertext and performed statistical analysis, rapidly identifying the wheel settings of the Lorentz machine. By the end of the war, 10 Colossus machines were operational at Bletchley Park, providing invaluable intelligence about German strategy at the highest level. After the war, in the name of national security, Churchill ordered the Colossus machines and their blueprints to be destroyed. The engineers and operators were sworn to a secrecy that lasted for decades. For years, the official history of computing began with ENIAC in the United States. But the true dawn of the digital age happened here, in a secret hut in the English countryside, born out of the desperate necessity of war. Bletchley Park didn't just win a war, it invented the future. Thank you for joining WW2 Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.